by exploring the biblical concept of forgiveness, particularly how it can sometimes be weaponized against people of faith. Now, while forgiveness is one of the most cherished aspects of Christianity, it can be exploited in ways that obscure the actual harm that is done, or it can be used to pressure victims to move on before they're ready. So we're going to begin today by examining two profound biblical examples of forgiveness. One of the earliest examples in the scriptures comes from the story of Joseph and his brothers in the Hebrew scriptures. Joseph, despite being sold into slavery by his brothers, ultimately forgives them when they come to him in a time of great need. This is a beautiful depiction of grace, where Joseph, despite enduring immense hardship, chooses to forgive rather than to take vengeance. He could have let bitterness fester, especially when facing false accusations from Potiphar's wife or when he was imprisoned unjustly. Yet, when his brothers who had wronged him seek help from him during a time of famine, Joseph demonstrates the power of forgiveness, providing them with what they need. Joseph even saw the working of God in the schemes of his brothers behind his back. He told his brothers, "Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me. God planned it for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people." Of course, the greatest example of forgiveness is found in the life, ministry, and death of Jesus of Nazareth. As he hung on the cross, wrongfully convicted and wrongfully crucified, Jesus uttered these words, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Forgiving those who were taking his life was an ultimate act of grace. Similarly, we see Stephen, the first Christian martyr in the scriptures, reflecting Jesus' example by praying for the forgiveness of those stoning him. He said in Acts chapter 7, verse number 60, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them," as his life was slipping away. These are mountaintop examples of forgiveness that many believers aspire to. But let's remember this: forgiveness is often misunderstood or misapplied, especially by those outside the faith. Here's where the problem lies. Sometimes people use forgiveness as a tool to pressure victims into moving on without fully processing the hurt or the injustice that was done to them. 9 black churchgoers murdered during a Bible study by a white supremacist. Almost immediately, the media began asking the victims' families if they forgave the perpetrator. Now, let's be clear, forgiveness is indeed central to the Christian faith. But rushing victims to proclaim forgiveness publicly, especially in the face of such a profound loss, feels exploitative. It feels exploitative. We see this same pattern time and time again. And I have to say it many times, it is in racial contexts where it's a heinous hate crime or a murder or systemic injustices that went on for centuries or decades. And there's a push for quick forgiveness, often at the expense of recognizing and addressing the underlying harm. This approach can minimize the need for accountability, justice, and even acknowledgement of the suffering that was caused, all of which are themes in the same Bible that talks about forgiveness. When we gloss over the hurt and the pain of the victims, we miss an essential part of the conversation. True forgiveness requires confronting and understanding the depth of the wrongs that were done. Forgiveness should not be treated as a checkbox or a moment to test someone's faith. And those outside of the faith community, especially the media or societal commentators should not be rushing to ask victims, hey, do you forgive them? Forgiveness is a personal and community-based decision. It is not something to be paraded around to satisfy public curiosity. And let me add this, people who are not part of a community of faith often do not understand the difficulty or the process of forgiveness. They may not realize that forgiveness is a journey. It is not an immediate outcome in most circumstances. It is also deeply supported by the faith community who walk alongside the one who is struggling to forgive. We also have to acknowledge that forgiveness, while always our ultimate goal, is quite difficult. And even Jesus himself, in his human experience, showed us how forgiveness can be excruciating. If someone isn't ready or able to forgive immediately, it doesn't make them any less of a believer. And it doesn't mean that they are not people of forgiveness just because someone in a given moment of hurt and pain and despondency can't utter the words, yes, I forgive them yet. They may need time. They may need support. They may need healing. And we as a community must honor that journey rather than treating forgiveness as a test of someone's faith in some of the most vulnerable moments of life. Here's another thing to consider is the selective nature of when and where forgiveness is brought up in these type of contexts. Because in certain situations, especially when there's racial violence or a history of discrimination and racism, or when there is a mass shooting that occurs, there's an immediate push to ask the victims about forgiveness. But have you ever noticed, we don't hear a whole lot about forgiveness every time the September 11th anniversary comes around of the attacks on our country? Why doesn't forgiveness come up in those discussions? We hear hashtag never forget, but I have never heard of a hashtag about forgiveness attached to September 11th. Why is forgiveness emphasized more in some situations and ignored in others? Could it be because race, politics, and power play a part when we think someone should forgive in an instantaneous moment? It's critical to recognize that forgiveness shouldn't be a convenient escape from difficult discussions about justice and accountability. At the heart of Christianity is the call to forgive as Christ forgave. But as we strive to follow his example, we must also understand that it is difficult. It is an ongoing process. Forgiveness is not always instantaneous, and nor does it mean that justice and accountability should be overlooked. Rather, it is about releasing the desire for vengeance and trusting that God one day, whether in this life or the life to come, will certainly make all things right. In our journey as believers, we must be careful not to weaponize forgiveness or use it to pressure others into saying something or doing things that they are not spiritually ready for. Instead, we must walk alongside them, encouraging them, building them up, and allowing them to process their pain and anger while encouraging them toward Christ-like forgiveness in their own time.